To the coach, I ask you, please respond in a video and explain why SHBG is at only 17 on a guy that is this lean. He's clearly not obese.
Greg, I did not think this would be our first public interaction, but what you are going to see here is a combination of me and a couple other guys talking through Shizzy's blood work. You brought up some valid points when it came to the blood work if they were taken in isolation, but when you put them together, they make sense due to Shizzy's situation. But first, before we get to the blood work, let me introduce one of the guys that's going to be talking. He goes by Fit Dad Mitch on TikTok, and let me just say I completely agree with this statement that he's about to make.
Now, the one thing I agree with Greg from that video, and it was a relatively long video, was that it is harder to decipher exactly if somebody is natural or unnatural based off of a single blood work in isolation versus a trend or a history of blood works.
This is 100% true. So even if we prove that this blood work is relatively clean, it does not prove lifetime natural status, and I don't believe that it does. But it is a step in the right direction. So let's hop right into it. The SHBG argument. It was low, but is it too low for Shizzy's situation? Let's talk about it.
Next, he says his SHBG is normal. Yeah, sure. It's within the 99% of people range. Does that mean it's normal for him? Absolutely not. It is rock bottom. Makes no sense.
Shizzy's SHBG levels make perfect sense when we look at his blood work in its entirety, especially as it relates to his albumin levels. We know free testosterone levels are somewhere around 1 to 3% of the total testosterone, and we have two ways of calculating Shizzy's free testosterone. The first would be to multiply his direct free testosterone results of 8.4 picograms per milliliter by 6.7, which gives us 5.6 nanograms per deciliter. The second would be to use his albumin levels of 5.0, his SHBG of 17.4, and his total testosterone of 340 to calculate his free testosterone, which gives us 8.4 nanograms per deciliter. As you can see, his free testosterone range is well within that 1 to 3% using both of those calculations, and they're actually even similar to Igor's. So yes, despite his SHBG levels being on the lower end of average, they make perfect sense when you look at the entire picture.
And this is the problem with simply saying his SHBG levels were on the lower end of normal. You have to look at it in relation to things like the albumin levels. If you don't do that, you have nothing. You have no ability to actually examine the evidence. And One Hot here does a very good job of it. But can we vindicate Coach Greg on something?
You want to know whose SHBG levels don't make sense despite being on the lower end of average? Eubanks at 23 nanomoles per liter, since we know his free testosterone is pretty accurate since he used the gold standard of equilibrium dialysis to measure it. However, if you calculate his free testosterone using his SHBG, his free testosterone should be somewhere around 26 nanograms per deciliter based off of his SHBG. Therefore, his low SHBG doesn't make any sense.
So even if Greg did miss on Shizzy's blood work, who knows about Alex Eubank? Maybe we'll leave that for another time.
So what would actually happen if he's recovering from a show is LH and FSH would actually be on the lower side.
Let's throw this one back to Fit Dad Mitch.
And as Greg mentioned, why is free testosterone and total testosterone low while LH is within normal range? Relatively easy explanation, the HPT axis operates on a binary feedback loop. Free testosterone production is not stimulated from the gonads without a pulsatile release first of GnRH from the hypothalamus and then LH from the anterior pituitary. This process takes time. It does not happen immediately. You need that precursor LH to stimulate the testosterone production from the Leydig cells of the gonads. It is very possible that LH and FSH return to normal post-show while testosterone production lag behind because that is just how biology works in men.
That was a little bit technical. So basically what he's saying is one should precede the other, and in this case it makes sense which one preceded the other.
So it makes perfect sense that Shizzy's levels are within the normal range 1 month after his own show.
So the LH and FSH of Shizzy being in the normal range, albeit the lower end of the range, is pretty normal 4 weeks after show.
We're going to see elevated AST. And so what are his AST levels? 60. And remember, the top of the reference range is 40. And so it's already 1.5 times the maximum of normal. When have I seen this in the past? On myself, in my own blood work, when I was taking 60 milligrams of Anavar a day. That's what I had.
So it doesn't really matter what you had, Greg. What matters is it normal for other athletes who aren't on performance enhancing drugs? It doesn't really matter. What matters is, are these levels normal for other people? Let's take a look.
Sure, AST was high, but ALT and GGT were exactly where you'd expect it to be. Shit, man, I'd be shocked at guys on anything more than creatine. LOL. And so let's just downplay something that is a clear and obvious marker of liver damage, which can, of course, be caused by, for example, taking LGD 4033.
But is it actually a marker of liver damage? Well, let's take a look a little bit further.
And so really, we should just assume that intense exercise is the cause of the liver strain, the damage that he possessed.
Exactly. Even Quest Diagnostics says AST can rise following strenuous, prolonged exercise. They also state that ALT is more specific for differentiating liver injury from muscle damage, and Shizzy's ALT levels were normal.
ALT, on the other hand, is more indicative of long-term liver damage, same with GGT. Shizzy's was within normal range for both values.
So what we have here is a mistake of AST and ALT. ALT is more indicative of liver damage than AST, but Greg chose to focus on the AST, which goes up above very often in natural athletes. 5 times the reference range is actually fairly normal. Yes, even in natural athletes.
Once those AST and ALT levels get around double the normal reference range, that's when it starts to become a red flag.
That was another well-known natural in the TikTok app talking about his AST levels, which are pretty much always above 40. Now you might just say, okay, well he's just another fake natural, but if you take a look at a couple experts talking about AST levels, this is what they have to say.
Liver health and liver enzymes, and one of the common questions that I see is people look at their AST and their ALT, and it gets a little bit above that normal range and they freak out. Should those people be freaking out?
Absolutely not. If that number is elevated 3 or 4 times more than normal, then that's when you worry about it. For example, AST and ALT levels, the levels in the lab say between 30 and 40. You're 80, you're okay. Now you're 120, 220, then okay, what's going on? Medications can influence that, exercise can influence that, diet can influence that.
So as you see, the experts aren't even concerned at 80. Shizzy had 60. They're more concerned when you get into the 120, 200 range. That's when the alarm bells start to go off. Shizzy was nowhere near that.
1.5 times the maximum of normal.
So it doesn't really matter that you say 1.5 times the maximum of normal. It doesn't matter. What matters is it normal? And it actually is.
First claim, and this is a common sense one, that Shizzy took spiked pre-workout spiked with SARMs in the past. Now that's what Shizzy looks like. Is it more believable that he just has relatively good genetics, or that he had trace amounts of LGD in his pre-workout previously in the past? I'll leave that one up to you guys.
Yeah, I thought this one was kind of a weird point to bring up, because at that point, you're just gonna say, okay, everybody is on performance-enhancing drugs. We're all taking supplements. We're all taking supplements from different sources. We don't know if we're getting the best sources everywhere. Trace amounts of these things are probably not going to lead to the gains that you're trying to say are attributed to the fact that somebody is on performance-enhancing drugs. It just doesn't make sense for trace amounts to do something like this. But that's an aside. Let's move on to more important stuff.
Second claim, bloods were taken 4 weeks post-show, not 1 week post-show.
That was another one that Greg did seem to kind of allude to, because he would point to pictures of Shizzy on stage and then say, this guy is shredded, his numbers should be this. But it wasn't when he was shredded. It was 4 weeks post-show. He'd already gained a significant amount of body fat, was in the recovery stage. You can't compare the two levels. It doesn't make sense.
Where the heck is the cholesterol? Why are we not posting about the cholesterol? HDL, LDL, ApoB? So why is that not in there? If you're not trying to hide anything, why don't you show everything? And so why are we selectively showing things here and there?
Honestly, this was probably the best point that Greg made in the entire video, but it would have been cleared up if he'd just either watched my videos or reached out to me. He didn't do that, so I'll explain here. This is the TikTok that I made when we went into LabCorp in order to figure out the test that we were gonna do on Shizzy. All right, guys, we are here at LabCorp to see if Shizzy, the phenom, is natural. So we got both Shizzy and Marcus Fit getting tested. This is Marcus. He's on a little bit more than creatine, if you know what I mean. Where Shizzy is the one we're testing to see if he's a fake natty. Okay, so we just found out that the test is going to be incredibly expensive, but we're still gonna do it. Just not for Marcus, because he can get free blood work from somewhere else. So basically, Marcus Fit, who's an IFBB pro, went with us, and we just said to him, okay, what are some of the labs that you would get drawn if you were trying to prove natural status? Marcus said, okay, well, we'll go with FSH, LH, SHBG, free testosterone, liver markers. So we just started listing these off to the people at the counter. They then said, okay, so this is gonna be this much, this is gonna be this much. They started adding up the costs, and we got up to, I believe it was 470. It was around 500. Don't quote me on that number. But we figured, okay, we got a pretty comprehensive panel here. People will be interested to see these numbers. This is what we'll go with. And then we showed the results. all of them. We didn't hide anything. That was what we had. Those were the numbers we had. Which is why I've always opened myself up, and anybody else that I test, to say, okay, if you want to see specific tests done on anybody that I'm doing these fake natural claims on, or on myself, just pay for it. Because everybody's gonna have different criteria for what they're looking for. So if you wanna see those levels, you simply say, all right, I'll pay for this test, we'll make it happen. Anytime, anywhere. And one last point that Fit Dad Mitch made about drug usage in general is pretty relevant to the topic, so let's hear it.
And we'll also throw in the fact that drugs have an excretion life. The excretion life of the drug is roughly 5 times the half-life of the drug. Considering most enhanced bodybuilders like myself are using longer half-life drugs, if we take something like testosterone and enanthate, for example, that has a half-life of 10 days, multiply that by 5, we get 50 days, which is 1 day over 7 weeks long. So if Shizzy had been taking performance-enhancing drugs, the drugs would have still been in his system for roughly 3 more weeks after this blood work had been taken. So do I think Shizzy is still natural? Yes, I do. Is it possible that Shizzy may have taken performance-enhancing drugs in the past? Yes, it's possible. I don't think he did, but it's possible. But overall, all of the comments Greg made in his video are completely explainable. If not, he just disproved himself.
And on to the very last thing that we're gonna deal with is about me being his coach and the random testing, which Greg put in quotes because he wanted you to question whether I was actually random testing him. Again, could have been easily solvable if he just reached out to me and asked, when did you start coaching him? But he didn't. So let's go into it.
Shizzy was going to get randomly tested by somebody else, and that was done by me. And we tested the blood markers that Greg was concerned with.
And so Shizzy luckily got randomly tested, by a stranger at random, and that guy was his coach. Is it really at random if the coach chooses the right time to do it? Imagine, your coach is saying, hey, I think you should take the test done at exactly this time. Because really think about it. Do you think anyone is going to get their blood work done at a time they think they're going to fail the test? Or do you think the coach will not say, this is the best time, the best hour for you to get this test so that we can get the most positive result to prove you are in fact natural?
So I already went through all this on my TikTok. You can go watch that if you want. But essentially, everything but in relation to Shizzy was done within a week. I literally DM'd him about coming to Echovision on June 3rd. I met him on June 6th. June 7th, we decided, let's go do a random blood test. And then June 8th, he was tested. So even if you were to argue that maybe we discussed it on June 3rd, which we didn't even know each other in person until June 6th, that's a week. What's he gonna do in that time? There's nothing you can do in that time to really fake a blood test. At least, not that I'm aware of. Maybe somebody else knows, but I don't. Oh, and there was other people there like Marcus Fitt and Dylan O'Brien who literally saw us come up with the idea to go test him the night before we tested him. So yes, it was very random. And I didn't start coaching him until I think it was 3 or 4 weeks later. So no, I was not his coach at the time. Well, yeah, Coach Greg, that is my response to you. So all of these blood markers, easily explainable. Randomized test was random. Cholesterol, we just don't have it. So if that's something that you wanted to pay for a test for or get other tests that you want done, pay for it all. I've actually been in contact with More Plates, More Dates before you even made your video to try and get more extensive testing on Shizzy because of the fact that I know people will not believe these things. But those tests cost around $15,000 to $20,000, so we're looking into possible funding. And he also has to be around for long periods of time in order to make it happen. It's like a 4 to 6 month process. They did it on Matt Does Fitness. I believe he's the only person in the fitness industry that's done it. Like, we are the ones who are trying to push for more strenuous testing. So if you want to be skeptical at this point, I'd say you might as well fund it for us. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to do that. But if you did want to prove to your audience that Shizzy was on stuff, it'd be a pretty easy way to do it. TNF out. All right. Let's go. All right. Now, if you want to stay natty like Shizzy, you got NAD+ here, the main ingredient, NMN, as shown on the Joe Rogan podcast.